Welcome, everybody. I'm Michael Schachter, president of the Carolina Nature Coalition, and I'm glad that you're all here, those of you sitting in this audience and those of you on Zoom. The Carolina Nature Coalition is happy to present this here. One of the reasons we protect the environment is so we can enjoy it. And this is a presentation that's going to talk about enjoying the environment here. I'm, what I could say, an occasional bird watcher. I watch the birds when I go walking and when I look out the window, but I'm very happy to have Al Gamache here, who is a true birder. And Al is going to give you his experiences and how he got into birding and some interesting features of birds. Mm-hmm. And so, without further ado, here is Big Al.
Yay. At first, I just wanted to say a few things about bird watching. As I was growing up in Attleboro, Massachusetts, I was aware of that there was something called bird watching and bird watches, but the way it was presented to me was basically, it was something that was done by little old ladies wearing tennis shoes and running around in gingham dresses, holding little opera glasses up to their eyes and chasing after bushes and little birds. Did I want to be a part of that? No way. I had no interest in birding at all. I mean, why would one have an interest in birds? I don't know. So to the very moment when I began just to tip from non-birder into birder, I still held that position of, I have no interest in birds at all. So just a bit of bio. I was born in 1940, at the beginning of World War II, and in Attleboro. Went through the school system, as we all did. And then I went to the University of Massachusetts for 1 year. And then there was a tragedy in my family, which in turn caused me to withdraw. I had to dig myself out of that problem. And when I did, then I applied to the Rhode Island School of Design, got accepted. It's a great school, highly recommend it. It's in Providence, Rhode Island, only 12 miles from where I lived. So after 4 years, it's a 4-year program, and at the end of 4 years, I earned a Bachelor of Fine Arts, a BFA. And then I also married my sweetheart at the time. And then just following the normal route of things, then I applied to grad school. And since I had never been any further south than New York City or further west than New York City, I decided to apply for a couple of Midwest schools and a couple of Southern schools. And I chose to go to Tulane University in New Orleans. I thought that would be the most different from Boston. And that was fine. That was fine. And it was a 2-year program. And at the end of those 2 years, I now had a Master of Fine Arts. And during the second part of the second year, one started looking for jobs, teaching jobs, that is. And I had a nibble in Birmingham, Alabama, and a nibble in Arkansas, in Arkansas, and also a nibble up in Wisconsin. And while New Orleans is a very interesting place, an interesting culture in general about that place, I was so sick and tired of the humidity and the heat. I want to cool off. So I went north. I had no idea just how cooled off I would get, but that was okay. Anyway, so I get to the university in Wisconsin in 1967. And it was a new department. It had just started the year before. A guy from Brooklyn, a sculptor from Brooklyn, had been hired to be the chair. And his name was Orazio Fumagalli. And 1966, they hired 6 people. And in 67, they hired 6 more. So now we were a faculty of 12. And I was there to teach sculpture, 2-dimensional design, 3-dimensional design, and build a bronze casting foundry. Anyway, so I made friends with the faculty, of course. And one of my best friends was a guy named Doug Cumming, who was from Iowa. And as a matter of fact, he graduated from the University of Indiana, one of the schools I had applied to, but obviously I didn't go there. And Doug was a sportsman. He was a hunter and a fisherman and all those things, which I was none of. So anyway, it's the end of the spring semester. It's toward the very end of the month of May, and he's inviting a number of people over for a big picnic in his backyard. And this is where it starts to be a little tippy. Because at one point, well, I can introduce at this point this bird. This is a bird called, back when I first got into birding, it was a member of the goatsucker family. Later on, it was a member of the nightjar family, and that's what it is now. It belongs to the nightjar family. The reason why it was called a goatsucker is because these birds that are related to whippoorwills and other nocturnal birds, it was thought by farmers that they came in the evening and suckled goats dry, which is not true, but that's what they thought. So that's how it got the name goatsuckers. Anyway, if you're looking at this bird, the key field marks to look at is just those 2. There's another set of white bars in the wings. But the main thing that identifies this bird is its sound. And it makes 2 different kinds of sounds. One sound is by voice, and the other is by feathers. And the feather sound is these nighthawks get way, way, way up in the air. And then they decide to turn and head down, 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 gaining speed as they go down. And as they're getting either close to the ground or treetops or building tops, they begin pulling out of this fall and slingshot their way back up. It's a very dramatic thing to see. So anyway, if you look in the bird, that's the feather sound. They stiffen their feathers in some way so as to produce that. And if you look in the bird books, they also have a voice sound, which is written as P-E-E-N-T. Peet, peet. So that's their voice sound, the peet. And then the boom sound sounds like maybe you're going to Kinston or something like that. And suddenly you remember, did I remember to bring something? So you pull over on the shoulder, open the door to get out, just with semi truck goes by. That's the boom sound. So I was going to play those 2 sounds for you. Okay, so what you're going to hear is, I think, 3 pinks. Now, do I play this into this speaker? Okay, 3 pinks and then a boom, and then there'll be 4 pinks and a boom. And for those of you who are birders, you'll be hearing a Chucksville widow in the background, but don't pay attention to that one. Pay attention to the foreground. Okay, let's see now. Okay, here we go. Did that carry? Okay. Anyway, so back at the picnic at the end of May, 68. I'm sitting right next to Doug. And one of these nighthawks does the dive pulls out and makes the boom sound. And Doug said, "Did you hear that?" And I said, "Hear what?" And he says the boom sound, and he describes it the way I just described it. And then we go back to talking about whatever we were talking about. And then with a few more moments, that nighthawk dives again and makes the boom sound. And Doug says, "Did you hear that?" I said, "Yeah, I think I did." So he runs into his house and he comes out with the John James Audubon copy and shows me what they look like. Okay. And then later that afternoon, we're walking around the backside of his house and Doug says, "Oh, there they are. There's a nighthawk up there." And it was going beat, flopping around, beat, and flopping around, beat. So, okay. Anyway, none of that made much sense to me. This was Doug's thing, not my thing at all. Now it's maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 days. I totally forget. I was working late in the studio and it was beginning to get dark. So I decided to wrap up and went downstairs. And in Wisconsin, when you finish work, you don't go home right away. You always go to the tavern to have a brewski. And that's where I was going to, the tavern to get a beer. And as I was walking by Lee's drugstore, I heard beep, and I said, "That's common nighthawk." I was amazed I could identify a bird. I didn't see it, I just heard it. So by the time I got to the tavern, there were a few people there, but I didn't know them. And I ordered a beer. And I was thinking to myself, I wonder what else is out there I never noticed before. So the next day, when I left the house, instead of driving to the studio directly, I drove down to the Red Cedar River. And Menominee, Wisconsin, is sort of in a bit of a valley, and the Red Cedar River runs through. So it runs through, and then they dam it up at Cedar Falls to create Lake Tainter. Then it gets to be a river again, and then a whole slough. And then it opens up into Lake Menominee with another dam, and then it drops again, and then it runs into the Chippewa River and then into the Mississippi. So it's kind of doom, 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 doom levels. So anyway, I just drive down to the middle part of it, and there's a cocoa family factory, Swiss Miss. And I go a little past that, pull off to the side, and I suppose we can show the second slide now. I see this bird. I don't have binoculars or anything, but it's fairly close in the cattails. And I'm thinking, wow, I'm amazed because I've heard of crows before, but I didn't know that crows had red shoulders. And, but sure enough, they do. So I think that's pretty special. So with that, I get in my car and drive to the studio and work on whatever I was working on. And that afternoon, I'm running out of some material. Don't ask me what. Running out of material. So I go to the campus art store to buy what I need. But I kind of like books too. So at that same time, I'm kind of going through, looking at books. And I come across this book, A Bird's Guide to North America, the Birds of North America. So I think, hey, I can now check about the red spot on the crow. So I index crow, and I turn to the page with crows on it. There's the raven, there's a Chihuahuan raven, American crows, Northwestern crows, fish crows, no mention of a red shoulder at all. And the drawings don't show anything. So being the detective that I am, I say, maybe it was something else. But where in this book is it? So the only thing you can do is to start at the beginning. And at the beginning, in this book, you get loons. You get the yellow-billed loon, which is way up in Alaska, common loon, Arctic loon, Pacific loon, red-throated loons. but none of those drawings show any blackness or any red shoulder. I have to turn to page 2. Grebes. Got a western grebe, redneck grebe, horn grebe, beard grebe, pied-bill grebe, least grebe. Again, no blackbird with red shoulders. Turn the page. Albatrosses, shearwaters, on and on and on, until you get to page 298. It took me like an hour to get there. And there, actually, the first thing I looked, I'm sure you can't see this very well. The first thing I landed on was actually the tricolor heron, which does really have red in the shoulder. But when I looked at the map, I found out it only existed in California. And then I noticed this one, and it had that little smear of mustard on it too. Red-winged blackbird. So I piled the book on top of what I was buying, went back to work in the studio. But that night, I brought this book home. And like a good teacher, it's like when you teach and you have a bunch of students, you say, for the next project, you're going to need this, this, and that. And I want you to read pages 223 to 29, something like that. So the first thing I would do was read the introduction. It's like the teacher giving you the assignment. And the guy said, if you're going to do this, it's essential that you have a binocular. It would be nice to have a spotting scope. It would be nice to have a camera, but you need a binocular. And he also said you need a notebook in which you can record the birds as you see them. So the next day, I went to my favorite discount gas station and bought a pair of binoculars for $15. But $15 back then was a little more than that. But they weren't too bad. They're not the ones I use anymore. In fact, I gave up using them about 4 years. But and then I went to the campus art store and bought a bounded journal. Now, I did know a few birds because back when my mother used to put out a feeder in the winter, so I knew cardinal, I knew blue jay, and then in the spring and the summer, I knew robin, and I also knew pigeon. Because sometimes my mother would bring, when I was a little tot, bring me to the commons in Edinburgh, and I would somehow look at those pigeons. They weren't very afraid of me, and I, kind of get close to them, and my mother would say, "No, don't get close. They carry diseases." I was like, "Oh, okay." So. Anyway, so I knew those 4, so those are the first 4 birds going in my journal. The cardinal, the blue jay, the robin, and the pigeon. And now the nighthawk, and this one, the red-winged blackbird. So in a couple of days, I decided to go back down to the Red Cedar River, probably the next slide, and see if I could find another bird. And so I found this sort of whitish bird. Given the view, you see an awful lot of brown, but the whole bottom is all white. I saw this kind of whitish bird, and I had binoculars now. So I got on it, and I saw that it had those 2 nice black stripes on its chest. I thought that was key. And then there's a little orange on the back. And I thought that was key too. And with those, however, I was amazed again, always amazed. Because when that bird turns so as to face you, it looks like it has a black and white bullseye right on its front part. And I said to myself, I know people shoot birds, but I didn't know they carried targets on them. But they do. So anyway, this was much easier. This was on page, I think, 114 rather than 300. So I got to this bird really quick. And that was the beginning of my whole process of birding, which was 1 bird a day, 1 new bird a day. Because as soon as I identified the killdeer, then I went to the studio and worked. And then maybe several days passed, and I just said, this is so exciting, this discovery of, I mean, I with this book, I got access to all this stuff. So I go down and I see, next slide, I see this bird. Now this one's not on the ground like the killdeer was running around, sort of more in the bushes. And it has a black bill, a black eyeball, a black cap, but the big giveaway is rusty underpants. With that, I think I have enough to identify. I forget the page that was on. It doesn't really matter, but I had to start with loons again. Loons, then grebes, then albatrosses, then shearwaters. And I eventually got to page 240. That's almost as bad as the red-winged blackbird. But there it was on page 40. And I know it was a gray catbird. And as I said, I just find this exciting that I can enter this world with this book. So probably go to the next slide. Now this time, instead of coming up the route the way I normally, I came the other route by the Miss Swiss factory. And the trees at the corner, the river comes down and bends. And there's just huge big trees right at the bend. And there must have been an insect hatch going on. I only know about insect hatch because Doug Cumming was always talking about when he trout fished, he was looking for insect hatches coming out of the river. Anyway, I noticed this bird, which has this just remarkable bright yellow, this wonderful black mask with a white outline, and it's sort of a brownish, and the brownish then turns into sort of yellowish, and then a bright yellow and a little kind of waxy spot on the wing. And as I say, the trees were full of them, like 50, 60, and they were flying out over the river, coming back and flying over the river. So I was looking at a whole, as I say, a whole menage of 50 or 60 of these things flying about. And I remember thinking to myself at the time how beautiful they were. And I thought you maybe had to go to a foreign land, some exotic place to see beautiful birds. You can see beautiful birds right there in Menominee, Wisconsin. And then on page, I forget, 78, where I do want to be a little accurate here. 258, page 258. On that same page, there was also Bohemian waxwings, which is the next slide, which still has that beautiful black mask outlined in white, but it has a sprinkling of rusty color up around the head, as though it had been messing around into some red brick dust. And it has same kind of yellow tip, but it just doesn't have one little red spot. It has all this design in it. And again, it has rusty. I don't know what it is with rusty underpants, but there, I identify that. But I was thinking to myself, it would be such a pleasure to see this bird. And I eventually did, 29 years later. As I was leaving Menominee, driving up to Duluth, and then driving along the North Shore of Lake Superior, getting to what's called Hawk Ridge. And while I was making my way up to the ridge, at one point I turned the car, and there was all sorts of birds, and it was these Bohemian waxwings. And then I saw this bird again 2 years later. My wife and I had gone down to Texas for Christmas because my father-in-law has a small family, mother-in-law has a huge family. So we were down doing Christmas with all the people in Texas. And then we had connected to somebody with a timeshare. So we stayed for a week at Alberta Springs in Louisiana, which is just on the north side of Lake Pontchartrain. But they also had right on the shore a state park, Fontainebleau State Park, where I got my wife black-bellied whistling duck. However, when we left there, heading back up to Wisconsin, we ran through a snowstorm, and we were hoping, and well, obviously we had to stop one night. Now we're continuing, and we're hoping, like the guy we had to take care of the house while we were gone to this Texas thing, we had hoped maybe he had shoveled the walks. But when we got to the neighborhood where the house was, he hadn't shoveled anything. There was snow on the porch and on the walkway, on the sidewalks, in the driveway. So we just parked on the side of the street. You can not get a ticket. So that meant the next morning, I had to get out and start shoveling the walls. And I was. And at one point, I get a little kind of tired. So I put the shovel in the snow. And I'm looking down the street. Oh, my God. There was no, this bird, like cedar waxwings are a little over 5 inches. This bird is a little over 6 inches. A little heftier. So looking down the street, I could see cedar waxwings. And then it was like, oh my God. I think. I ran in the house to get the binoculars, came back, and sure enough, I had bohemians right in my neighborhood. Yay! So not only did I have them in Minnesota, I now had them in Wisconsin. Anyway, and next slide, where do we go from bohemian? Oh yeah, this is another thing. Now this is a bird that's really common around here as well. I should have mentioned that when I got here in 2002, I'm backtracking here a bit, to the nighthawk. When I got here in 2002, in the late afternoon, I could go down to the First Presbyterian Church, position myself in their parking lot, which gave me a nice swing of sky, and see nighthawks, not this one, the first one actually, nighthawks booming and flying around and peaking. And I saw them in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, there were fewer, 7, there were even fewer, and 8, 2008, none. The birds had disappeared from the city. I still could see them down at Fort Macon or out at Cedar Island, or the Croatan National Forest, but they had left the city completely. Now this bird has not left the city. You can see these right here. Well, what impressed me about these birds, well, several things impressed me about them. One thing that's very impressive is they never stop flying. They get up in the morning and they fly all day. They never perch on anything. They build their nest out of little twigs, which they break off at the end of branches without stopping, just a twist, and then they're on with the twig. And then they bring it back to a chimney, and they got big saliva that's gummy. And they start gumming the sticks together on the bricks and together to build a little stick nest. And obviously they stop at the nest, but once they come out the chimney, they're flying nonstop. But what really impressed me was I didn't know how they were flying. It's like normally birds fly like this. Sort of like the way rowboat. It's like parallel as opposed to a kayak, which is like this. Water in the air and the water in the air. And these things, to my eyeballs, look like they were more likely to be flying kayak style than rowboat style. Now, I'm sure that's not true, but I was, and to this day, when I'm seeing them flying and I'm on them, it's like, to me, it still looks as much kayak as it does rowboat. Anyway, common bird. We'll be here in April. Okay, next slide. Oh, yeah. Now I ran into problems. This is the problem of hearing a bird, but not seeing it. And if you don't see it, you can't look it up. This bird here is a common yellowthroat. And By this time, I had sort of left where Swiss Miss was, and now I was in Riverside Park. And there's a rail line, and then there's Riverside Park, but the river sort of curves over to eventually, it's just squeezes the park, and the only thing that go on is the rail line. And just a little on the rail line was the trestle to allow a creek to fly through. And not every time, but many times when I was on the trestle or a little after it, a little before it, I'd hear something going, witchity, 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 witch. Witchity, 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 witch. So I had already begun carrying index cards in my pocket. And so this one, for me, this bird became the 1, 2, 3 bird. Like 1, 2, 3, space, 1, 2, 3, space, 1, 2, 3, 1. The 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1 bird. And many times I would pass by that trestle, hear the bird singing, and never see it. So one time it did pop up. It's a little tiny, it took 4.5 inches, little tiny bird. And I saw the yellow, I saw the black mask, and I saw it outlined in white, enough to the book. And I forget what page this warbler was on, but it was a yellow-throated, common yellow-throat. And which indeed, then I could see the book said, this bird says witchity, 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 witch. But I had to see it in order to get it. Okay, that's common yellow-throat. Next bird. Whoop. Whoop. Next bird. The other way, the other next bird. Ah, this is the great crested kingbird. It belongs to the flycatcher family. And this bird is always kind of amazing because it too sings and sings and sings away, but it's hidden in the foliage up in the treetops. So you have to either be incredibly persistent or lucky to ever see this thing. Now, this bird is perched on, the reason why I picked this slide is because it's perched on some iron gate, which means it does come out of hiding sometimes. That's when it's lucky. And it has a very loud song. By the way, in April, this bird comes in droves back to New Bern. And I always liken this bird to my alcoholic friend, who was very funny. He was very funny. When he was sober, he wasn't funny at all. But when he got drunk, he became very, very funny and hilarious. He would sometimes just sort of command an audience because he was so funny. But some people thought he was rather rude, loud, obnoxious, which he was. And that's this bird sings like a weep, 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 sort of like loud and obnoxious. So anyway, I didn't have that bird on my index card, but I just knew it was like Rob, my friend, the alcoholic. Okay, but yeah, in April, this bird will come in, sit in trees, and make these weep, 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 weep sounds. Okay, next bird. Another flycatcher. This is eastern kingbird. Beautiful bird with a little crest on the top. Most flycatchers do have a little crest on the top, like the last one had a crest on the top. Black back, white underparts, and a terminal white band. And this bird sings sort of like which you can write down as small z, small z, small z, small z, small z, small z, big Z, big O. So I kept that. So whether I saw it or didn't, I knew what it was. It was, again, breeding time where they sing a lot. All right, next bird. This was actually the last bird I saw in 1968. I saw a total of 41 species. And this, of course, is a red-tailed hawk. Now, not that this tail is red, it's more orange, but they call it a red-tailed hawk. But even if it was perch, you could still identify this bird. First off, you have to figure out it's a beauty, it's a hawk. But it has these belly bands and a clear breast. And it always has that. And even sometimes when this bird is like a young bird, it doesn't have a red tail, but it still has clear and belly bands and has dark patagials. So you can identify this bird just hovering over the fields. Okay, so anyway, the second year, since I started birding at the end of May, I missed all the ducks. The ducks come in, I mean, first off, like in Wisconsin, the lakes freeze over by November. You can drive a car on them by Thanksgiving. And then people flock fishing, ice fishing, you probably know about that. And then as soon as, and the lakes don't really open up until April. Finally, you get some weather that's, the first thing that happens is where the current is coming through the lake begins to melt the ice. So it starts to split and it gets a little wider and wider and wider. And as it does, ducks are just coming in by the thousands, which I won't go through. I'm not going to include ducks at this point. And it's a great rush, wonderful thing to see. Where do we start on the next slide? Ah, yes, winter in Wisconsin. There were times, because I'm also building a foundry now. I mean, I worked at an art foundry at Rhode Island School of Design. I worked at one at Tulane, but I never knew how to build one. Now I'm building one. And so many times I'm going to the Twin Cities to pick up material, whatever required to further the foundry. And I would see crows. Now I knew what a crow was. Didn't have red shoulder. I'd see crows on the snow, but I was going, like 65 miles an hour. So I never stopped a bird. But then it's like if Minneapolis, let's see, if this is Menominee and you go east to Eau Claire, west to Minneapolis, I was going that route. But it was full of traffic. So I took the other route to Eau Claire, not 94, but a back road, Highway 12, where you could stop. And I observed this bird standing on, this is snow, by the way, it's not a white panel. This bird here is a horned lark. It really doesn't have horns, but it has those little tufts. And it's remarkably beautiful, I think, with the yellow face and those black stripes on the face, and the cute little ears. And this bird, I never, even as being in Wisconsin for years, I never saw this bird in January, but it would come onto the fields in February. And for me, it was the beginning of spring migration. So I would talk to people about, hey, in February, it's cold as hell, there's snow everywhere. I said, spring is here. Because these guys had come in. And you can see this bird. This bird was a lot more common in Wisconsin than here, but you can see them here. You have to be out in agricultural fields. It likes to get its toes in the dirt. So it doesn't really like grassy fields. It likes fields that have been plowed and kind of lifted up. And I don't know, anyway, agricultural fields. Okay, next bird. I probably want to include one duck. This is called the ring-necked duck. It's like got a black behind, black top, black front, all black. If this were, and then white here, white. If this were light, it would be a lesser scaup. But when it's dark, it becomes a ringneck. And then it has this wonderful little design on the bill, black tip, gray bill, golden eye. The lesser sculptor also has a golden eye. Doesn't have the white, and it has a lighter back. Anyway, that's just one of that around here. If I want to see that duck, I'd probably drive to Bridgeton, go to the Food Lion. In the back of the Food Lion in Bridgeton, there's a pond, and they hang around there. And if I can't find them there, then I'd go to Fairfield Harbor, the second entrance, not the one that's gated, but the second entrance. And there's a big pond in there where there's always a gathering of these ringneck ducks. Okay, next. This is a Vesper sparrow. And one of the reasons why I include the Vesper sparrow is not easy to find around here. But the reason why I include it is one day, Doug Cummins gave me a call. He and John Will were going to go smelt fishing. And he said, well, we're going into an area which should be pretty birdy. Do you want to come along with? I said, sure. So the three of us drove up to where, and then we had a field to walk through, finally to get down to the river, the slough area that I was talking about before. And this bird also, it doesn't show it on the picture, but the two outer tail feathers are white. So John, Will, Doug, and me were walking along this cart path, heading toward the river. And this bird takes off from the ground, flies into the meadow, but it flashes white wings, and Doug says, Vesper sparrow. I was sort of pissed at him because I've been having so much trouble, such fun figuring out what birds are with this manual that he just ruined it. It's sort of like if you're teaching calculus and you give the students the answer without going through the procedure. It's like robbing them. They probably like it, but I don't know. They're not going to learn calculus. So because I could have come back here and maybe spend hours and hours trying to identify this bird, which would have been so much fun. The way I subsequently identified it is, let me have this little thing. Let's see. There we go. Sparrows, generally speaking, you can divide sparrows quickly into those that have plain breasts and those that have streaks. This obviously is one that has streaks. And then even when you're into birds that have streaks, it's certainly not a song sparrow, where the streaks are much bolder. It's not a Lincoln sparrow, where the background is not white but yellow. And so just on the basis of that, you can tell what you got. But it also has little identifying things such as a nice eye ring. And the thing I really like is what I call the jawbone. This malar stripe is like, and then it curls up around the back of the auricula. So it's kind of like kind of a jawline. And then if you're really close enough, there's this little orange spot on the shoulder. So bing, 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 Vesper sparrow. Vesper. Okay, next. And I didn't want to go birding with Doug anymore. He ruins all my fun. Good. Next. Now this is another kind of one of those strange things. Now, my wife, Frances, her first love was dance, and which then bled over into theater, even though she had a degree in sculpture from RISD. But she had a friend, Marion, who was also into theater, and Marion's husband, Warren Lang, we went out to visit them one time. This was, again, sort of in the spring, after school was out. And they were all excited because they had gone up into the Chequamegon National Forest. And had gone to Medford, and then had gone a little north of Medford and gone to some campground. And that night, and it pitched a tent, and that night they could hear hoo, 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 the barred owl, which this is, barred owl. And but they didn't know what it was. And the next day they asked other campers, and they said, oh, that was the barred owl hooting. So they were telling me the story about the barred owl. At that time, I think I was like at 120 species of birds, and I had not had the barred owl. So I felt a little jealous and a little annoyed. So I began to kind of quiz them. Just where is this campground? And how do you get there? And I guess there was a name for it, which I forget. And they told me kind of the routes. And by that time, I think I had a DeLorme Atlas Gazetteer. So I studied that and figured out probably where they were. So I went to my discount gas station again to buy a tent, $29. Had a little roof, little sidewalls, and all these guy wires. And I put it up in the backyard. So it wasn't that difficult. So I said, friends, let's go camping. And she was fine with it. So we went to that spot, that campground, and pitched the tent. We didn't have sleeping bags or mattresses. We probably just brought a lot of blankets to lie on. And sure enough, that night, the eight hooter. Who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all? Is the little you can identify. This is one of the few owls that has black eyes, dark eyes. Most owls have yellow eyes. This one's black. But the bill, instead of being black, is yellow. And the stripes on the neck are horizontal, and then stripes are all vertical. So you got vertical, horizontal, dark eyes, and no ear tufts. Smooth head. Beautiful bird. And wonderful sound and all that kind of stuff. But now that I had a tent, I could travel. I just didn't have to do Menominee. I could pitch a tent anywhere. Well, campgrounds. And I saw several other birds in that campground. I saw a red-eyed vireo, which was a new bird. Saw a yellow-bellied sapsucker, which is a new bird. And then I saw a most magical bird, which is the next slide, which is a hermit thrush, which is a bird pretty much defined by spots, not streaks so much as spots, and then sort of brownish, and then with a reddish tail, which, if you're on it with the binos, he sort of lifts it, and then he lets it sag. He lifts it, and then he lets it sag, which is very characteristic of this bird. But the reason I saw this was I had left the camp, and I was just hiking along a rather gnarly, rock-ridden trail. Do I do my imitation of that bird into this mic? Try it. Try it. It's got a wonderful little song. It starts off with a lead note, and then it waffles after it. It's like, it's a whistle, but with Z's in it. So here I am, and I'm hearing the sound. Like, my God, what is that? And where I am, it's an old dusty road, and there's dust all over the leaves on both sides of the road. But I'm hearing this sound. It's almost like the sirens in the Odyssey. I've got to go find that bird. So I start moving through the woods, and I get maybe 35 feet in, and I'm still hearing this. And I come across this theater of sphagnum moss as far as I can see, tamaracks as far as I can see. And so what I came from was dusty and dry, and suddenly I'm in a juicy tamarack bog. And I'm still hearing that bird. So I start wandering in because I got to get this bird. And I keep looking back to make sure, because I could get lost in this. I keep looking back to try to figure out what's what so I can make it back. But I keep going in, keep going in, keep going in until I finally see the bird up on a log. Oh, the other thing about this bog is at one point I wasn't in very far and I lost my balance slightly. And so I put my hand out on a tree to break the fall and the tree just fell over. I think, hasn't there ever been wind in this place to blow that tree over? It just fell. And I don't know why anyone would ever come into this place. So I felt maybe I was the first person to ever have been in it. And I eventually found the bird. And then when I got back, when I usually at home, my parents had brought me a book, Birds of Massachusetts and Other New England States, by a guy named Edward Forbush. And he published this book in 1925. And the thing I liked about Forbush's book is this would give me clues to the identity, but Edward Forbush would do the same thing, but then he'd have at least a page and a half of very interesting writing about the bird. So I'd know a lot more than just being able to identify it. So I had carried that book along and I found out that this nickname for this bird was the swamp angel because of its ethereal song and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, as I said, now I had a tent. Am I running over? I'm running, okay. I had a tent. So the next year, I planned on going to Sorona, Wisconsin, where there was a Audubon camp, where you campsite and all that. Then I was going to go to Crex Meadows. I'm not sure how I ever found out about Crex Meadows, but somehow I did. And then the third place I was going to camp was Drummond. So I had set that up with Sorona a week, Crex a week. Well, I'll come back to Menominee, but and then Drummond. So I had 3 places to camp. What's the next slide? Oh, yes, Sandhill Cranes. Sandhill Cranes are a great place to. Not that this really matters to him, but anyway. Like at Sorona, at the campground. I got the following birds for the first time. American bittern, golden wing warbler, black tern, veery, wood thrush, ovenbird, and leaf flycatcher. All great birds. Second place was Grantsburg, up in the northwest corner of the state, right near Minnesota. Crex Meadows was a great place to see sandhill cranes. And I went there many, that Sorona, I only went to it once. But this was like, what, 30,000 acres? Yes, 30,000 acres. And the really neat thing is, in the mid-70s, they tried an implant, a restoration program, where they had greater prairie chickens. Usually, if you're in Wisconsin and you got to see a greater prairie chicken, you go to Buena Vista near Wisconsin Rapids, which is kind of far away from where I was. But they, as I said, had implanted greater prairie chickens in Crex Meadows. And for a few years, they were doing well. And then, as far as I understand, they just stopped breeding. Just stopped breeding. And eventually the population declined and declined. And it was eventually declared as a failure to restore that bird into Crex Meadows. But anyway, Crex Meadows was a great place to be. You get some really strange birds, like redneck grebe. I was going to wear a redneck grebe shirt. Wilson's phalarope. Anyway, I went there many times. It's a huge, it's some forest, but it's mostly just savanna and prairie and some big lakes and a lot of little potholes. And it's great for shorebirds, great for ducks, great for, anyway, great place to bird. Okay, next slide, I think. Okay. And Drummond was the last place on the list to go to use the tent. And by that time, we were a little more sophisticated. We had mattresses, we had, you know, everything. At first, all you needed was a hammer to do the stakes. Yeah. Got a hammer? Up goes the tent. Little places to cook and all that. Anyway, so up to Drummond, which is quite near Lake Superior. This bird, by the way, is a northern goshawk, mostly identified by the eyebrow. Anyway, my wife thought it would be neat while we were up there by Lakeside to bring some floaty things. You could, back then I had good lungs and I can actually blow those things up. No more. And so we had blown two of them up, and she sat in one, I sat in the other, and we paddled out on the lake, paddled out, and then over the treetops flew this bird right over us. And the thing, being educated, I knew what I was supposed to really look at is this. But what I was looking at is all this barring, this white dance of barring all over the chest and into the wings. And it was so damn close. I don't know whether it was warning us or something, but I don't think so. And then it flew off. But this was a great bird to get. Should I go on? All right. Where I wanted to go from here, I put my glasses on so I can see. Well, that's page 2. I already did page 2. All right. Anyway, oh yeah. Well, to cut to the chase, I mean, this could take forever just to set up. I'll just cut to the chase. We had joint custody. My wife was in San Francisco. I'm in Wisconsin, and we have a child. And the wife takes the child to San Francisco. But since we had a joint custody, I was supposed to have her for the summer. So what happened then was at the end of school, mid-May, I'd get prepped for taking a trip out to San Francisco. And Doug Cumming, my mentor, as it were, told me, you got to stop at Roy Lake, South Dakota. There's all sorts of wonderful birds to see. That's the first time I ever saw American white pelican, which is a huge bird. But what Doug wanted me to see is a whole flock of these American white pelicans that go up and up and up and up and perform what he called the popcorn effect, in which they go so high up, even though their wingspan is this plus 3 feet, big wingspan. But they go up, but when they're so far up, they all look kind of dark, and then they turn and they all look white, which Doug called the popcorn effect. And sure enough, you can get, if you go to, you can get American white pelicans at the quarry. You can get white pelicans out at Pea Island. But I've never seen them flying up as a huge flock and doing this kind of black and white popcorn effect. Anyway, that was a great place. But what was wonderful was, now that I had a tent, and I had my mother belonged to AAA, so And AAA produces all these little brochures on camping sites in South Dakota, camping sites in North Dakota, in Montana, in Idaho, in Wyoming, in Colorado, and so on. So I had a bunch of those with too. So I had my tent, I had instant coffee. I had a whole bunch of boxes of granola. I had this book, and I had the camping books. I'm ready to go across country. So I just went from one primitive campground to another to another. It would take me like 14 days to get out to San Francisco. And the birds were just all new, all new, all new, all new, all new. And the second year again, but a different route. I always started off at Roy Lake, but then I splinted out in different places. Now on the trip back, my daughter was not that interested in birding, so we came back much faster. But going out was a hoot. 14 days of seeing great birds. And which is going to be, next. I'm going to summate all these trips with one slide. The black-billed magpie. Fairly good sized bird. The West is full of them. Gorgeous thing to see. And I'm going to conclude all those trips out to California for the next slide, which is because there's a lady named Deborah Shearwater, obviously she changed her name, who did pelagic trips along the West Coast. Pelagic referring to oceanic. It's like you get the continent, and then you get the continental shelf, and then you get the drop off into the deep ocean. And there's a swelling up of food at the edge of the continental shelf. And there's all sorts of birds that spend their entire lifetime out along those edges. Those would be the albatrosses and the shearwaters and all that I ran into earlier. And so one time I was going to go visit my daughter who lives out in California. My wife's deceased. I think we're getting.
You're good. You're good.
Oh, I'm good. Okay. My wife is now deceased, but my daughter's still out there. So I still go out to visit her. And as a matter of fact, she's coming back to here for my birthday next week. So the furthest west I've ever been is like you can go to, because I was looking for a pelagic trip, but Deborah Shearwater doesn't run any pelagic trips until September. And this was in June. So what I could get on is a whale watching trip. But the neat thing about that was when I pulled into the parking lot, Marina Green parking lot, and the boat was there, and I parked there, I saw a couple of gentlemen that didn't really look quite touristy at the end of a station wagon. And later on, I got there a little early, so I was just sitting in the car waiting for the appropriate time to head for the boat. And those two guys were walking across. And I swung the door open and I said, "Are you going on the boat trip?" And they said, "Yeah." I said, "Whales or birds?" They said, "Oh, birds." And it turns out those two guys were researchers on the Farallon Islands years ago. And they usually would get together sometime in the summer just for old time's sake and take a trip out to the Farallon Island, which were these big jaggy things. And so I joined them. So it was actually a terrible day for whales, but I was sitting in the middle, and one of the guys was sitting here, and one of the guys was sitting here, and we were having a great time looking at birds and identifying birds. And I had done my homework, so there was a number of birds I could identify, but there were two I couldn't. And one, the south, as we went underneath the Golden Gate Bridge, one of the guys said, "Elegant tern," which looks remarkably like a royal tern. So only by virtue of him could I count that bird. And then at the very end, there was a South Poa skua, which he could identify, which I couldn't identify. So I kind of cheated and got that bird. But all the other birds we saw, I had done my homework and I identified. So that was pretty, so they liked it. I liked it. It was a lovely trip. The next slide I got is, this is a trip out east. This one here. This was in what, 2004? Actually, 2004 was about the last time I really camped for a week. And actually, my current wife, my in-laws, Lon and Nancy Shelby, he had been teaching at Southern Illinois. But he had gotten into sailing as I got into birding. And so when he retired, he came to Fairfield Harbor so he could continue his sailing. But as he got older, it was too much work. So then he had an RV trailer. He eventually got too old for that too. But by 2004, he was still okay, sort of. And one afternoon, my wife went over to visit parents. And she came back and she said, my parents are going to go to Arcadia this summer. Do we have any interest in going with? We intend to stay in the trailer. I said, well, I don't know. Let me check. So I started looking for, I think we may be interested. Yeah, tell them we are definitely interested. So we're on that trip. And actually, this is a two-fold. These are Atlantic puffins. And this is a razorbill. And so these belong to the family called alcids. They're sort of North America's answer to the penguins, although they can fly. But their wing beats are just like, they can hardly fly. They spend most of the time in water, but they can fly. And just the fact that it was an alcid is kind of funny, because when I first came here, I joined the Lower Neuse Bird Club, which includes some birders that are really good and beginners. It's the whole swath. Just like the Carolina Bird Club, that's North Carolina and South Carolina, has some of the top birders in the country and beginners. So it's always a mixed group. If you're interested, come on. And oh yeah, now we can. So I think the first year I'm here, there's a bird called the thick-billed murre. Apparently, the guy that teaches some, maybe ornithology or whatnot at NC State had brought a bunch of students out to Fort Macon. And some student had pointed out to the teacher a smaller bird that rather looked like a common loon, downsized. And it turns out it was a thick-billed murre. But I was, in the first year of belonging to the club, I was still totally out of the loop. So the word got out and a lot of people went down to see this thick-billed murre. Late February, I guess it was. So when the meeting came up on Wednesday, Ed Curl, who was the president at the time, came up to me and said, did you see the bird? I said, what bird? He said, thick-billed murre. I said, I couldn't understand what he said. And I said, where was that? And he said, Fort Macon. I said, no, I didn't even know about it. And then still before the meeting actually convened, Wade Fuller came up to me and said, did you see the bird? I said, you mean the one at Fort Macon? And he said, yeah. And I said, no, I didn't even know about it. And after the meeting, Bob Holmes, who started the whole club back in the 90s, he asked me if I saw the bird. And I said, what bird was that? He said, thick-billed murre. I got the thick bill, but I never could understand the M-U-R-R, murre. But what was that again? The thick-billed murre. So as soon as the meeting was over, I went home as fast as I could and opened this book. And to find the thick bill, it was indexed. But I had never even opened those pages because that kind of bird, those alcids never go to Wisconsin. They're coastal. So it was probably 2 years after that. It was around Easter. And I was going to bring my mother, who was now living, not with us, but at a retirement home, to church. So Saturday night, I went on Carolina Birds on the computer. And I found that somebody had found a thick-billed mirror down at not Beaufort Inlet, but Bogue Inlet on the west end of Bogue Banks. And so I told my wife, I said, I'm going down to Bogue Inlet tomorrow. And she said, oh, no, you're not. You're taking your mother to church. It's like, oh, yeah, right. I got to take. So I had to bring her to church. Then I had to have dinner with her. And then I brought her back. And then I took my suit off and probably dressed like this. And off I went to Bogue Banks. And when I got there, it was like Barnum and Bailey had been there with no trespassing signs. Keep out, keep out, keep out. No parking, everything negative. But it was still, I think, March. So nobody's down at the beach. So I just parked right up in front of all the no parking signs. Climb up over the bank. Climb up over the bank. And I'm looking, and I see this miniature common loon coming by. Oh my God. The only thing identified, you can identify that bird is has a little white streak. It looks like a miniature common loon with a little white streak on the gape. And that was right in front of me. The houses were falling into the water. If you go down there now, there's a big, huge sand thing. But back then, the ocean currents were washing the island away and houses were falling into the water. And they had great big, huge, I don't know, sandbank, mega, mammoth sandbank trying to hold the bank together so more houses didn't fall. Anyway, I was standing on one of those and the bird just, and off it went. I finally saw a thick-billed mirror. Anyway, there were mirrors up here too, but these are all alcids. And that was a great trip. Where am I now? Arcadia, gorgeous place. Has anybody been to Arcadia? And Maine? Gorgeous, super gorgeous. God, beautiful. Okay. Okay, next slide. I'm coming to the end quickly. My last year of teaching would be May. And then we'd be moving theoretically to North Carolina. That was the original plan. When I started going with Rebecca, she said, you've already had a family. I want a family. And if you're not interested in having a child, then we should call this thing off. I said, I love kids, which I do. So we got married. And the other thing was she wanted to move to North Carolina as soon as I retired. She thought Wisconsin winters were too long. Anyway, but somewhere in the fall of 1999, her sister lived in, lived in Texas, lived in Travis County, Austin, Texas. And she was part owner of a company that had all to do with this modern technology of which I know nothing. And they were representing big companies and all that kind of stuff. And they had one graphic designer designing their websites. So Deborah, down in Texas, asked Rebecca up in Wisconsin if she'd have any interest in working on a website for some chemical company that they were going to represent. And my wife said, sure. So they sent her some information up and Rebecca started playing with it and playing. She knows computers quite well. Playing with it, sent it down. They liked it. They needed to snuff it up a bit. And eventually they got it and they used it. Then they gave her another job to do the same thing. Then they said, you know, if you're willing to come down here as a graphic designer, we'll give you a full-time job. So after Christmas, she went down to Texas. And so now we weren't going to go to North Carolina. we were going to go to Texas. The plan was to stay there for 5 years. So this is my one Texas bird I'm showing. Although it's very interesting because in Wisconsin, I had birded for what, how many years? 33 years or something. And I had a total of 280 species. 280 species in 33 years. I was in Texas for a year and a half and I had 300. Texas is a birdie place, as is California. The reason why, one of the reasons why Texas is such a birdie place is because I don't know if you've, like this book, usually they don't come this way. They usually have Eastern guides and Western guides. And Texas runs right down the middle. You get Western birds and Eastern birds and Gulf birds. So between the Gulf or the ocean and the two sides of the dividing line between West and Eastern, they pile up a lot of birds. Matter of fact, I remember one time on a bus, a bird tour, one of the professional guides was sitting next to a lady. And I overheard the lady talking to the guy saying, all real birds end up living in Texas. Which is not true, but I could see her point. Anyway, so yeah, this is a green jay. There's many different kinds of, let's see, jays. The Stella jays out west, gray jays up in Canada, scrub jays, 3 different kinds of scrub jays. There's brown jays down in Texas, pinion jays in Wyoming, and then very southern part of Texas, just as it comes down to the Rio Grande River, there's a little slot where this bird comes up from Mexico. There's a whole mess of birds that are actually Mexican birds, but they just come up over the border. And this is one of them, gorgeous green jay. And okay, now there's 2 more birds here. I was thinking, like, given the polar thing, there's like a north and a south and a west and east. This was before Rebecca was in the picture. I was going with a girl named Kathy, and she had a kid. And she had a brother who was a cook down at some restaurant in Naples, Florida. So she wanted to go visit her brother over Christmas. So we would take her car. So we got down to Florida. And this is the best bird I think I saw in Florida. This is a snail kite. Although I did not see the bird carrying a snail. But what it is, what I saw, it was that kind of interest because she was driving and I was running shotgun. And we had come down the coast. We had crossed over. There's a huge lake down in Florida, Okeechobee or something like that. I don't know what that. Big lake. And we were driving on the western side of that. And she was driving. And at one point I said, slow down a bit. And we were at that point traveling quite just the same speed as this was. And it had this bright orange bill and bright orange legs and white in the tail rump. And it was a snail kite, which is a very rare bird. You were asking, that would be better than the red cockaded woodpecker, snail kite. And then the very last bird is a northern hawk owl. And this is up in the Saxon bog. The only reason I even knew about the Saxon bog, by this time I had joined the Wisconsin Society for Ornithology, and I received their newsletter. And their newsletter for January, this is in what, 19, do I have the year? 1996. The newsletter had a gerfalcon being seen at the Cargill grain towers in between Superior, Wisconsin and Duluth. So I said to my wife, why don't we take a trip up there to see if we can find the gerfalcon, which is the largest falcon in the world. And so we didn't know exactly where to go, but it was Sunday. So all the trucks that would be barreling around these grain towers were silent. And so we just kept looking until we saw a bunch of people standing with tripods and scopes. And that's where we needed to go. So we joined them. And they had been there since 9 o'clock in the morning. and we got there about noontime. And with another 3 hours, the Falcon didn't show. But one of the more gregarious couples decided, people were saying, well, it's about time. This is not going to work. They had gotten in their car. So I went out and they said they're going to go north to Bern. So I went up to them and I asked, where are you guys going? They said, Saxon Bog area, which meant nothing to me. And they started to describe where it was. And he said, well, we have a gazetteer. So they showed me where it was. And the only two things I remember is the page number and cotton. So when I got home, I had a Minnesota Gazetteer Atlas too. So I found the page and I found the route. I found cotton, and that's where Saxon Bog area was. So I decided to go up there, spend a day in Duluth, and then a night in a motel, and then up to Saxon Bog area. And that's where you get a good place to see the great gray owl, which is the biggest owl in North America. And then there was the northern hawk owl, which I also saw, although it was way, 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 way off in the distance. And the tree, there was a branch that came out over the street, which was not plowed. And all I could see is it had two black stripes on the side of its head and had a long tail. And the only bird I could fathom that had two black stripes on its face and a long tail was an American kestrel. And I was thinking, what the hell is a kestrel doing up here? So I took my scope out in the back of my car and got on it. And then I saw all this barring. And then I saw the head sort of like on the turret of a tank. It was like, that's an owl. So now I was looking for an owl with two black stripes and a long tail, and it was a northern hawk owl. And that's the end of my talking about birds. Whatever. That only took however long.
Thank you so much. I'll tell you, I've enjoyed it, and this was, boy, what some personal history and some bird history. Wow, I haven't seen those birds. I mean, what I see is chickadees.
If you want to see that bird, you have to go to northern Minnesota.
Northern Minnesota. I've never been to northern Minnesota, and I don't know if I'm going to get there. Thank you from the Carolina Nature Coalition. I love this presentation.
Thank you.
And we do presentations every month. So if you're interested, next month we will have a thing on conserving land. We have the Nature Conservancy. Janice Allen from the Nature Conservancy will be speaking next month, and I hope you all can join us. So thank you for coming tonight, and hope to see you next month. Take care.